38-year-old man. I'm a 38-year-old man who has done a lot of therapy and self-growth. I'm a 38-year-old man who has done a lot of therapy and self-growth, and I have a master's degree in clinical mental health, and I run a therapy practice of over 30 providers. I make plenty of mistakes in relationships. Kayla and Lauren can chime in a minute. I'm here to just double click on that point. And my wife would probably have some things to say, but unfortunately, her team has informed me that she is unavailable for comment at this time. And I've got a lot of tools for healthy communication, flexibility, curiosity, perspective taking, individuation, and I know when I am getting outside of my window. But then I get around family, and suddenly all of those skills that I've mastered, I've made a career out of helping people implement. They feel like a foreign language that I've never even heard before. I'm not 38, I'm 13. When the hell did this happen? Today, we're talking about why healing attachment can make family interactions more painful, why even emotionally healthy adults can regress around their parents, and how to protect yourself without pretending you no longer care.
Before we dive further into that conversation, I just want to welcome listeners to this space with us. This is Relationship Advice Podcast. Kayla, Coulter, and I are 3 licensed professional counselors. Coulter, you kind of alluded to that in some of your intro there. And we are so passionate about bringing all of the mental health knowledge that we learned and practice on a regular basis to these conversations. And I also have been wanting to just highlight from the beginning of these conversations that we know information does not automatically equate to transformation. So we've been wanting to bring some intentionality to invite you all into some interactive spaces with us. We are on YouTube now. So if you've been listening here on the podcast for a while and you're interested in seeing our faces, seeing our reactions.
You want to see the faces.
You want to see the faces.
I was getting a lot of facial expressions during the vignette.
I've listened back to episodes where I'm like, I know that I'm silent, but also I know I'm like dying laughing in the background. And I'm like, if you don't have the visual, you're definitely missing.
You're missing out.
A part of the conversation. Yeah. So come join us visually on YouTube. We also have a really cool platform called Relationship Academy on School, where we engage regularly with practices, challenges, video questions and answers, polls. It's just a space where you can come and actually like ask questions and learn from other people as well. We've got some cool courses where we dive deeper into some of this content. So as we are moving our conversation today into the realm of attachment and family, we spend a lot of time talking about relationships from the angle of like having a romantic partner. Sometimes we dive into friends, sometimes we dive into family. I don't think we've really gone into the depths where we're going to go today on this topic of relationship when we are adults with our parents, especially when we have started maybe doing some learning or transformation work.
It's really common that when we start to, take apart our attachment wounding and investigate and learn and eventually start to heal some of those wounds, that all of a sudden we recognize more triggers with our family. And it's like, why the heck? What? Shouldn't I be better now? Shouldn't I, be able to handle this better? Why would I be getting more triggered now that I've started to do this work?
So you're saying it's as we become more aware, almost as we grow, it's like we start getting more triggered. That feels like the opposite of growth, Kayla.
I know. It's a real pain in the ass, to be honest.
Well, I have shared with you guys before, but I just think about my time working at a university as a mental health counselor. I was on a university campus for 5 years. And so all of my clients at that time were like 18 to 24-ish. And one of the themes that I started to notice right away is that, you come in fall semester, you have a lot of people who are coming away from their family of origin for the very first time. Like it's the first time that they've left their house, maybe their city or state, and they're living with other people, they're interacting with other culture. information, education, and they're coming into therapy like, I want to understand who I am and I want to work on anxiety or depression or self-esteem. And they start doing all this cool work and they get maybe to like winter break time and feel like, man, I've like really learned some cool stuff. I've improved my boundaries and my communication with my roommates and I'm feeling more self-confident. And then they go home for winter break. And then basically our first 2 weeks back in January, all of the sessions would be clients coming in being like, everything I learned went out the window. I've completely regressed. I don't think I accomplished anything in therapy because I went home and everything was just the same, if not worse, as before I started this journey.
Mhm. I think another common place this shows up for us in therapy is after the holiday season,
Mm.
and clients have spent some additional time with family that they don't usually spend. It's like all those pieces get hit again. Even if it's not this like this is my first step in the therapy journey, but it's like now I'm around these people and I remember
Mhm.
what this is like, or I'm having some new awareness of what's happening here.
I think there's this kind of strange little phenomena that happens in life that like the the stage of life or like the dynamic of the relationship that you meet someone in that carries on for forever. Like I'm thinking I've got a brother who's 6 years younger than me, and all of his friends, even though they're like full grown men, they're kind of like kids to me still because like they were kids when I knew them. And I think of friends I've made who are the same age as my brother now, but I've made them as adults, and I just see, oh, we're just totally peers. Like there isn't really an age gap, even though it's the exact same age gap that I have with my brother and his friends. And so I think there's this kind of weird phenomena that happens. It's almost like someone from high school. You're like, well, I was a senior and they were a sophomore, even though they're like 2 years, 38 and 36 at this point. It's no different. But it's like we get back around our parents, and that same dynamic exists. They see us as like, that's the kid. That's one of the kids. And I see my dad kind of struggle with this at times because he'll go into like being a dad, being a parent, and then he'll kind of catch himself and be like, and you're your own man, so you get to, you make your own decisions and stuff. I just imagine it's difficult. So I want to kind of call that out for our parents out there. And if maybe you're in that stage of life where you've got adult children, this would probably be a helpful episode for you to understand what's going on for those adult children.
Well, and I want to name that other side too as we enter into this conversation, because another thing that I've heard over and over and over in therapy, is a concern usually that does come from family member, like, is therapy just all about blaming parents? Whatever is wrong is just your parents' fault. And I've heard so many parents afraid of their kids even going to therapy because it's like they're just going to turn them against me and anything that's wrong is going to get pinned on me and it's going to rupture the relationship and they're not even looking at my side of this. What do you guys think about that piece?
Well, it's low hanging fruit for sure. It's not to say that it's not true sometimes, but uh, it, I think it's an easy thing for therapists to reach for who maybe aren't quite as skilled.
I don't know that I feel that way about it. I think it's like it is inevitable. I am going to ask every single one of my clients about
Of course.
their family. We are going to look at those dynamics.
Mhm.
And I do think like maybe the low hanging fruit part is if you just leave it there. Like if you just leave it at like, oh, yep, just tell me about what your parents did.
Yeah.
And it was that without kind of going deeper into the work of self as an
Mhm.
adult and relationship with our own emotions and nervous system. But I'm interested to hear you, Kayla, unpack a little bit too, just from the attachment perspective. Like there's a lot of complexity here. Why do we have to ask clients about their parents? Why do we have to talk about parents? And why are parents afraid of this?
Yeah, I think it's valid to be afraid. I would also challenge those parents, though, to look back at their own childhood and recognize that there probably are some things that happened to them that have shaped the way that they see the world and their feelings and their protective moves. Like, it's just part of us, And I think as much as I can, and you'll probably hear me say this throughout this episode as well, I try to anchor to this idea that our parents did the best that they can with the tools that they had. And the reality is that even today, you guys are both parents. You're going to parent in ways with the tools, that you have. And, as your children become adults, those tools should improve over time. And there are going to be things that you do that rupture your child's development, even if you don't intend to. And so that's what I mean when I say that for most people, we do the best that we can with the tools that we have. But when we've been exposed, our parents have been exposed to trauma and their parents who maybe went to war and things like that, those tools were not as good as the tools are today. And therefore, we rupture our children's attachment in ways that we have to be able to both take accountability for, but also, as you were mentioning, Lauren, and then also as adults, the client, your child in this case, would then need to be able to take accountability and change their behavior as well. So we're seeing both sides of that in therapy.
I hear this question a lot from parents, young children, teenage children, when they start getting into therapy, unpacking some of the dynamics with their parents, and they go, oh my gosh, I'm probably doing some of the same things to my kids. And the question they have is like, how do I not do that? And for one, well, it's probably already too late. But two, I would encourage people to kind of absolve themselves of some of that burden, because it is kind of inevitable. I think what's important is that when they bring it to you later, that you listen and that you're available to hear. You bring some understanding to why you maybe responded that way, but just that you're available and able to hear that. I've sat with a lot of people with their parents in therapy where they have disclosed really hard things, and the best sessions aren't the parents who can say, well, here's why that didn't go that way, or why I had to do that. That they just go, you're right. Like, I hear that. I missed that. I didn't know. And I'm sorry.
We talk so much on this podcast about this idea of individuation and like understanding what it's like to be me and understanding that it's different, what it's like to be you. And that concept applies just as well when we're looking at our relationship to our parents, even when we're adults. And I don't want people to miss this, because even I think, Kayla, the way that you were saying it, I think it's so easy for people sometimes to hear like, well, the further we go in time, the better it gets, right? It's just better now than it used to be then. But we also don't want to miss all of the contextual differences, right? It's not just about the tools that might get better. It's also about, parents today are navigating technology that did not exist back then.
Yeah.
Right. And parents back then were navigating a different economy than existed before them. And, it's like every generation has its own culture, has its own, burdens that it's bringing from the generation before. And it's to some degree apples and oranges when we're looking at like, okay, well, how I parent now is going to look so different depending on what my community and resources look like. And then there's also kind of this like skill part, I think, which is what you're talking about, Kayla. Like, we continue to learn about the brain and behavior and emotion. And so it's like, we don't want to discount that knowledge is evolving. And even with that, I think people can think like, oh, I have the internet, I have the podcasts, I have the books, I'm going to do it all perfectly. And it's like, it's not about doing it perfectly. It's about trying to understand your picture and your context and your children and where you're at.
Well, and I guess not, we should probably also mention the fact that our relationship to therapy today is vastly different than it was a generation before us. So unfortunately, there are probably many of us that don't have parents who have gone to therapy. Some of us do, but I think there's a lot of us that don't have that experience. And that's a common complaint that I hear in my sessions is like, I'm doing all this work. I'm going and fixing all the things that my parent did to me, but they won't even go into therapy. And I'm like, yes, that's valid and frustrating. And their relationship and the views and philosophies around therapy were much different than ours were.
Yeah.
It's just different.
Yeah, it is. And I mean, even I think all of us have been in this field of therapy for a little over a decade. And it's like, even looking back 10 years ago, the field was different than it is now. Like the things I learned in grad school, I do not practice therapy that way.
Correct.
Now. And so it's true. I'm like, yes, I think about people in, the boomers generation who have told me about experiences they've had with therapists. And I'm like truly horrified sometimes when I hear about things that therapists have said that I'm like, yeah, no wonder you think therapy is total shit, because was sometimes.
Yeah.
And probably sometimes still is, depending on what the fit is.
Well, let's move into this contrast, this before and after experience, where before I went to therapy, things felt different in my family relationships than they do now.
Mm.
And let's look at some of the why that difference exists.
Well, we normalize the unhealthy dynamics that exist within our family. And we just think this is how a family interacts with each other. I mean, and of course, how else are we going to know?
My brain is even thinking too. I like that you used the word different, Kayla. It's not like things felt totally good before, and all of a sudden I did therapy and now they feel bad. A lot of times my clients are telling me like, no, it felt bad before too. It's just like even more charged now. Like
Mm.
I was kind of like, it's like the fish in water who doesn't know what water is. Like the water might be polluted and I might be having a hard time breathing and swimming, but then to see that the water is polluted, to be like, wait a second, it doesn't have to be this way. I could start operating in a different way. It does add a different layer to this. So I think the way that I would say from my clients, it's like it's even more charged. Like the awareness is even more dialed up. It can be even more frustrating too that we can't apply maybe some of the new like regulation skills or communication skills that we start seeing ourselves apply in our other relationships when we find ourselves back around our family of origin.
Well, I like what you said about we can't use those same skills. I mean, I think one of the things that happens is like we learn a skill in therapy and we kind of practice it. And then when we take it into our real life, it's like the other person didn't learn their lines. Like they don't know their side of the script. It's like, I'm going to say this thing to you. And then
now you go.
yeah. Well, and then it exacerbates it because we
For
get
sure.
angry. It's like almost worse than not having the conversation at all. Cause like, you're not supposed to say that way.
Yep. And I the thing I often will say to my clients is like, once you start to untangle this mess, this attachment mess that we often bring into therapy, you can't unsee it. You can't unsee the things that you start to learn. And you're like, in therapy, a lot of times it's like, that's why that happens that way. Or that's why I behave this way. Or that's why I see the world in this way. We start to make sense of the way our brain sees things and the way that we behave. And then we can't unsee that. So then we're starting to make these connections in real time when we're then watching, maybe that dynamic play out in our family of origin. And it's like, oh, there it is. That's the thing, right? And it's like we can't unsee it. And then to your point, Coulter, if we tie this in, our family is not in the therapy room with us. So they're not unlearning or, recognizing these patterns. They're just doing things business as usual. And we're sitting there like, oh my God, would you look what you're doing? You can't undo it after you start this work. That's sort of like a consequence in some ways. You can't unsee those dynamics now.
I'm going to repeat myself a little bit, but just to make sure that this is tying together, right? It's like now I can't unsee it. And I, outside of it, am seeing myself show up in a different way, right? Maybe I'm with my partner, my romantic partner, or my own children, or my friends, my coworkers. I'm not finding myself yelling as much anymore. I'm not finding myself being as rigid or being as dysregulated. Like I have some new skills. I'm like, I can like take a pause and I can calm myself down and I can say, give me a moment to think about that. And then I come back into my family system and it's now they're doing the thing that I can't unsee. It's like, you're still responding in this like guilt trippy way and you're not supposed to be doing that. And it makes it that much harder for me now to use the skills that I can use other places because I'm not as triggered in other places as I am with my caregivers that my system is so familiar with. And so it's like, we're mad that we can't stay regulated. And so we really can focus that energy on like, you have to stop triggering me. Like, stop doing this. This is what you did my whole childhood. This is why I had to go learn all these things in the first place. And now you're making it hard for me to do the new way that I want to do it.
And to tie in Coulter's vignette, now I'm not a 38-year-old man. I am a 13-year-old boy, because what happens from an attachment perspective is our system is putting us back into that time and environment where we were initially wounded, and so then it reactivates like those more childlike reactions, even if in other relationships we can do that more maturely.
I want to add too, it's like maybe you're listening and you don't feel like you were really wounded. I think some people look back at their childhood and it's like, no, it was traumatic and it was like painful and there were bad things that happened or like good things that should have happened and didn't. There's other times, like I can think of clients who have expressed, I felt very loved and very cared for by my parents, but I also just took on this internal responsibility that it's my job to keep everybody happy. It's my job to keep things light and to make sure mom's not sad. And nobody put that on me, but I took it on myself and nobody pointed out that I was doing that. And so we might look back and not necessarily feel like a resentment or anger, but it doesn't mean that there aren't still going to be those like little kid parts that get activated where it's like, oh, someone's uncomfortable. My job is to fix it.
And I want to give another variation of this too, because I agree with what you're saying, Lauren. And I think sometimes this can be, like you said, harder to connect with if you didn't have this like outright traumatic childhood. But I'm thinking about the clients who come into my office who maybe in their family system, we just didn't really talk about emotions. Like we didn't talk about hard things. I didn't really have this place where I'm having difficult conversations or even just talking about emotions in general. And then in therapy, I start to learn how to do that. And I see some benefit of it. It feels better. But then when I go back to my family of origin, we have these like very surface level, easy conversations. And it sort of feels like there's nothing here. Like I can't connect. Like all of a sudden now it's like right in my face that this has always been like this level of like surface connection. And now I can actually see what's missing. And that feels really hard to tolerate.
Yeah. There's actually so many people coming to my mind as you describe that dynamic, Kayla, where it's like connection, right, can look so many different ways. Connection could just be, okay, I do these chores and you plan this dinner and you coordinate who's getting mom and dad Christmas gifts. And it's like we maybe talk a lot. We maybe have a lot of FaceTime with each other, but it might not feel like that relational intimacy that you're saying. Like then we start to experience that maybe with our spouse or with in group therapy or our friends. It's like, oh, I'm being more vulnerable. This feels so much deeper. And now there's this grief that I don't have that with the people who are actually most important in my life.
Yeah. And it can feel really like it disconnecting in a way that it never did before, and that oftentimes can feel initially confusing. So I am hopeful that maybe some listeners out there, if you're having that experience, then that makes sense. It makes sense if you've started to expand your own emotional depth, and now it feels like I'm grasping here. I'm like, I'm holding the whole conversation. Why aren't you tuned in? Like, ask me a question about me, and then it feels disappointing.
just something just popped into my mind. I'm remembering my wife said like she was describing some of this, like she had gone to college and like learned some new words and stuff,
Some new words.
Good education.
She had like gone home, and I mean, she was also in like, some like church groups and stuff. And she like asked her, she's like, I want to have like more vulnerable conversations with my dad. And she's like, how's your heart, Dad? And he's like, I don't know, but my pancreas is sure acting up. Just like, what the hell am I supposed to do with that? He's never heard that question before.
Yeah.
And actually, I love that, even just thinking of like, sometimes we feel like, okay, I got this new language and I'm going to go do this vulnerable ask.
Yep.
And on the other side, because I'm not first considering what is it like to be you? How is that language going to land with you? It's like jarring and uncomfortable. And it's like, I don't know how to engage with this. I don't know how to respond to this. You're like,
yeah,
if you learned Spanish and then you came home and started talking to me in Spanish one day.
Yeah, rarely does the person answer back like, I've been waiting for you to open this door.
Oh, how is my heart?
Yeah. We've never had a conversation like that. Yeah, we've never had a conversation like that before, and I've just been waiting for the moment.
For my child.
Now you're ready.
Now you're
ready. Now you're ready for an intimate, vulnerable relationship with me.
Yes.
It's like the Grinch movie when all of a sudden his heart just starts to
Grows
grow.
3
Yeah,
sizes.
Three
exactly.
sizes.
Mhm. Yeah. I want to name too, I think like another place that I can see this be really challenging for adults is when they're now doing their own parenting. And that can also like really stir up some triggers where it's like maybe my parents now are watching me parent in a different way. Or when I see them interacting with my kids, it's not the way that I am now trying to do it. And so that also can add some extra charge here to some of the anger of like, why won't you go and learn these things? Why won't you show up in a healthier way?
Well, and what typically will happen in like this first stage of like, okay, well, I recognize this, and now what do I do is often the question that comes up right here. It's like, okay, I see it. I see that there's a difference here. I don't like it.
Mhm.
So what do we do?
Mhm.
And there tends to be this like binary experience of like either I have to just accept it and deal with it and be unhappy, or I can't have this relationship with them. They aren't going to be able to meet my needs. And our brain
Mhm.
kind of really moves quickly into like two shit sandwiches.
Well, and I think the first place that I see people go most often is this like blame, anger. My parent needs to change.
Mhm.
Now that I see it, they need to go to therapy. They need to read this book. They need to listen to this podcast. They need to, and it's like there's this like fixation on
Oh,
like
yeah.
they have to change this, which I'm just gonna, spoiler alert, as a therapist, it's not where I'm about to take you. I'm not about to take you to how you change your parent. Like we're going to notice that all of that comes up, but again, that's kind of that like childlike experience and energy that comes up. Like I want them to do it, whereas a lot of the work we're actually doing in therapy is how do I now learn to be in relationship to myself in a way that maybe my parents weren't able to show up that way, but I need to learn to do that, not get them to do it when I'm in my 30s.
Yeah. But it also makes sense because in my mind, it's like a bargaining strategy for that grief that I don't want to feel. It's like, I
Absolutely.
don't want to feel the grief that my parent isn't, doing this work with me and isn't this like, going to go to this level of depth that I really am craving with them. And so if I could just fix that, if I could just drag them into therapy or tell them that they need to go, then I don't have to feel that.
You know what's
Absolutely.
funny is like I've had this experience before with clients where they bring a parent in for therapy. This is called a collateral session. So they bring a parent in to discuss what they've been learning, and they've pointed that out. I'm like, well, you've never even been to therapy, and the parent will be like, I've been to therapy before. Like, they're like, you have? Like, yeah, I've done a lot of therapy. I'm very pro therapy. It's kind of a funny thing that happens.
Yeah. And there's so much maybe that we don't know, I think is what you're highlighting, that it's like we might not know a lot about what
Yep.
kind of work our parents have done or how they have
Mhm.
evolved. As a trauma therapist, I've also had the experience quite a handful of times where I have a client that maybe had like a really abusive childhood, and that has never really been like talked about or worked through. But then the parents do quite a bit of therapy, and then their adult relationship actually feels really safe and really supportive. And then there's this like really hard dynamic of like, right now, I actually do feel like I have access to all of the things that I needed. But then it also feels like a betrayal to my child self that was so hurt that, like, where were these parents then? Like this is just complex from so many angles.
Our mind likes to be able to categorize it in one way rather than both of these can be true.
I think like you're saying culture, the other thing that comes up is like this variation of like, well, they did try their best. Okay, I heard what those people said on the podcast. And so they tried their best. So like, why am I still so hurt? Then I might go after myself if I'm not going after my parent. And it's all of the things, right? It's like we don't have to just see them in silos, right? It's all of these pieces. It's that they might have tried their best. They might have still hurt you. They may not want to go to therapy. They may have gone to therapy and they're still not going to, transform into this I almost said therapist, but this parent that you're dreaming of. Like there's a lot of feelings to feel here when we don't get to just skip over that and move to fixing.
Well, and I think about, if I think of couples work, and again, this individuation, teach me what it's like to be you. I do think it's legitimately harder when it's with our parents, because with our partner, it's like, you're not supposed to be my parent. A lot of times what's coming up in the cycle is that I want you to respond to me when I'm having like a toddler tantrum, I want you to respond to me like you're a nurturing parent. And you're not doing that, which makes me feel like I'm not important and you don't love me. And we do all this couples work to be like, hey, we both have inner children, but we both have to be our own adults here. But with our parents, it's like, no, you are the parent. Like, you should go first. You should apologize first. You should be the one who's able to communicate that I'm more important, you know? And so it's like, that is really, that's a hard feeling to override when we're trying to do this. Like, okay, what is it like to be you? What was your own trauma background? What was your own experience growing up like? What, you know, how do you cope with your feelings differently? And based on the culture and community around you, maybe it would actually be way harder for you to do some of this work than it is for me to do it in this day and age.
And I don't want to miss what you're saying. This is like one of the biggest steps of trying to heal this relationship with our parents, is gaining perspective for why they are showing up in the way that they are. Like, this individuation piece is one to spend a significant amount of time on, because otherwise we're not, if we do want to have that relationship with them, and I think that's also the caveat that we need to name here, is if we do want to work on this relationship with them, that is a place where you have lots of control and lots of ability to start to shift and grieve and understand differently. And I also at the same time know there might be people who are listening that say, I don't want to give that to them. I don't want to give them any, perspective here, because the hurt has been too monumental. And I understand that, right? I'm not trying to change that, but I think for the people that do want to have the relationship, that's a huge, important step to spend quite a bit of time on.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the ways we can do it is, if you have a parent who's still living and you have a parent with a relationship that even if it's not ideal, you could ask them questions. What was it like for you as a child?
Yeah.
What, when I see, X behavior from you, like, where do you think that comes from? Like, we can start to have those conversations to really understand what we're seeing from their point of view, to really get more clarity on the why.
And this is one of those places too, I'm just going to remind listeners, like, there's a difference between curiosity versus questioning, because I know sometimes we bring this in like a questioning way where it's like, well, Mom, why do you think you do that? Like, why do you think you do that thing?
Okay, so passive aggressive.
Yeah. Right? like I'm fishing for an answer, so that once you give me the answer, I'm hoping that you're going to see that you should stop doing that. And that's not what Kayla's saying, right? I'm hearing you describe, Kayla, like, let's bring some individuation. Let's bring some curiosity. People don't actually feel more inclined to change when they feel this pressure from us that they have to change, that they're not okay, that I'm not interested in understanding you the way you are. I'm just trying to get you to see how you should be different. And this is a place where we actually could slow down and just say, like, yeah, tell me what it was like to be you. What was your relationship with your parents like? Is there anything that you wish they would have done differently? Right? Like, what do you think is, the way that you manage hard feelings? Like, and it can be hard not to like bring all the therapy words, the therapy speak that we use. I think when we come to these conversations, we want to be as like, human and relational as possible.
Well, no one likes righteousness. And so it's not going to help you. We've got to be careful with the skills that we learn, because we might, to Lauren's point, we might think that we're showing up curious, but it's not curiosity if there's really a criticism or a veiled statement behind it. I'm just really curious. Where did you learn to behave in such an unhealthy way? Like,
Yes.
That's not a question. That's not curiosity. That's a jab.
Right. And I recognize that sometimes, I've heard so many times in my office, like, they're not going to talk to me about this, Kayla. Like, I'm telling you, we talk about football. We talk about, the weather. We don't talk about that shit. We're not like my parents are not going to talk about this. And so you also, we could get crafty here. Do you have an aunt or uncle? We could ask other people in the family for some more clarity on different dynamics. A first cousin, perhaps. And but there's probably somebody we could ask.
Well, we could also ease our way in.
Yes, that's what I was just gonna say.
Like, it doesn't have to start off with like, how often did Grandpa tell you he loved you?
Right.
It's just like, start with asking about what did you guys normally eat for dinner on a regular Wednesday night?
What were dinners like during your week?
Yeah. What were dinners like during your week? What time did Grandpa get home from work?
Mm-hmm. Did you guys play games when you were younger?
Mm-hmm.
Like we could ask lots of like safer questions.
Yeah. It's
Mhm.
also a good way to actually like practice genuine curiosity without setting ourselves up to get triggered, because we might have the good intention that like, okay, I'm going to come in and try to just learn more about what it's like to be them. And then I go too deep too fast and I get myself triggered there versus if I'm just like, what did y'all do for Halloween? Like, what was that like when you were growing up? What do you remember fighting with your siblings about? Like, what do you think was like the most fun part of high school for you? Like, can we ask some of these less charged things that are going to feel connecting if our parent is able to look back and be like, "Oh yeah, I really loved that I played sports in high school."
And if you're having trouble coming up with a list of questions, this is actually the one of the things I do like some of these AI tools for, because we don't have to come up with that all on our own. We could come up with a list of like, what are some things I could ask my parent about their childhood that are safe and easy to talk about? Like there are good things about these AI tools. I know there's a lot of things that I don't love about them, but at the same point, like this is one of those things that maybe, or I'm sure there's probably if you Google this, there's probably a list.
There's a couple of cool books
Somewhere.
that you can get on Amazon or Target that's like, "Dad, tell me what it was like to be you." I think that's like the title of the book, or like, "Mom, what's it like to be
Mhm.
you?" And it's like a whole little journal of these things.
I just
Yeah.
asked ChatGPT while we were
Thank you, Coulter.
sitting here. The question it gave me was, how did you experience abuse as a... No, I'm just
No.
kidding. The question it gave me was, what was your favorite way to spend a Saturday when you were a kid?
Love
Cute.
that.
That's a good, safe little cute question.
I like that.
Yeah.
And just to reiterate maybe the intention here, from the work that you've probably heard us talk about on previous episodes, our brain goes to make meaning in places. And so it does that with our parents as well. And it's really common for us to make meaning about why our parents are showing up the way that they are, or they're not talking to us about, emotional depth, or they won't go and do therapy. It's easy for us as the adult child to say, well, it's because they didn't love me enough, or they don't care enough, or they're selfish. And what we want to try to do here is get more information to get a fuller picture of what might be happening instead of just really getting so fused to that belief.
Something I'm thinking about too from the other side of the parents. Like I have had so many of my clients who are the parents of adult children.
Mhm.
I mean, in their 50s, 60s, 70s. And
Yep.
and even when I think about parents who are, in their 30s right now, 40s, it's like parenting is one of the most sensitive shame spots for people, especially I see this with mothers, where it's like we could talk about their childhood trauma, we could talk about their relationship issues and their attachment dynamics and their work stressors. And as soon as there's even like an inkling of like maybe I parented in a way that caused my child pain, the shame gets so big. It's something that can be so hard for people to tolerate because actually it was so important to me that I did love my kids. It was so important to me that I was trying to do better than my own parents did. And I'm not saying this is the case, across the board, but I just think it's a piece that can really easily be missed, that it's like sometimes maybe our adult child is coming to us saying, "Hey, you need to be different. You didn't do this right." And because it hits that shame, we see protection come online so fast that we're like, "And see, now you're not being curious and you're not being accountable and you don't care what it was like to be me." But also again, on the side of what is it like to be them, like that can be such a loaded thing to try to slow down and unpack, that maybe I was doing the best I could and it still had a painful impact.
I'm thinking about the listeners that might not have even like a moderate safe relationship with their caregiver, and so like there is quite a bit of risk here to go into even like questions like we're talking about, and like this desire to like, I've got a boundary up, I've done this work in therapy, and so now I've got to protect myself because I realize there has been a lot of pain that I've experienced as a child, and so I've got a boundary up and keep myself away from these people. And I want to just talk about that piece for a little bit. Because it feels a little tricky for me, because I think, I'm inclined to believe you. If you're my client and you're saying there's been something that has been really harmful. And then the reason this question came up for me is because of what you were just saying, Lauren, and that is like, we're we might be getting some sort of response from our parents because of either their history, their trauma, their shame about how they've parented you. And so the cycle then exists with our parents
Mhm.
just as much as it does with our partners.
Mhm.
And I think that is the piece where oftentimes we're saying, like, we can't move to making a decision about our relationship and about our partner so fast without spending more time trying to practice here and, be more vulnerable and be more curious. Except, what about when there is like a big risk? How do people navigate boundaries in that situation? And when should they put these like firm walls up? And what do you
Good
think,
Lord.
Lauren?
I
I know.
I feel like I'm like, we could have a whole episode. I think even, and probably we will at some point have a whole episode on like estrangement, because I think when you start asking some of the boundary questions, that is what people want to know right away. I start doing this work. I get really triggered when I'm around my parents. What kind of boundaries do I need to have? And I mean, here's the first thing I'm going to say. If there is real abuse that has happened, especially if it's like there's been sexual abuse, like, yes,
Mhm.
we need to be talking about really intense boundaries. Sometimes because of trauma history, I actually see people not use boundaries fast enough where it's like, well, yeah, there was sexual abuse, but they're my parents and I still want my kids to have a relationship with their grandparents. And I'm like, actually,
Mhm.
I'm alarmed. Like we need to really talk about safety. But because of that, like there are those extremes and there also are so many temptations to just get pulled into the cycle where it's like because I want them to change first, because I can't tolerate the trigger that keeps coming up for me while I'm trying to learn how to regulate myself and like parent myself in some ways, we can go too fast to rigid boundaries that actually reduce the chances that we're going to heal this relationship because now we're not showing up in a way that feels safe for our parents to like experience us in a new way.
And I'm imagining it might go both ways. Like sometimes we might have to do very rigid, firm boundaries up front, and then maybe over time take those boundaries down to more flexible boundaries as we gain some safety and perspective and healing. And maybe there is an ability for us to work toward a more vulnerable relationship. And then sometimes we might need to sort of like, I don't know, dip our toe in the pool and like, okay, I'm going to learn from this situation. And now I need a firmer boundary in this particular area with my parents because of X, Y, and Z. But in this area, I can have a little bit more flexibility. I could imagine it going kind of in both directions depending on what the context is.
Yeah. I would encourage people to start though by really examining what are your current expectations of what you expect to be receiving from your parents, because I think there's like logistical things like, well, I expect them to help me with my kids, like with childcare, or I expect them to help me financially, or I expect them to help me, with like tangible things. And then there's a lot of like emotional expectations that we need to examine too. Am I expecting that they're going to meet me with curiosity? Am I expecting that we're going to have this deeper relationship? Am I expecting that they're going to be able to manage themselves in a way that maybe they're not able to right now? Like I think just getting some clarity for ourselves on like how reasonable are my expectations? And if
Mhm.
I expect this of them, what is maybe the cost of that, because it's like, well, if I rely on them for help with childcare, or if I rely on them for financial help or something like that, um, what are the risks if maybe like now all the time that I'm spending around them is hitting these other triggers, but I'm expecting them to do this, and then am I expecting them to show up in a way that they can't really show up, and that's not really a fair expectation right now.
Mhm.
hmm
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and if we're feeling kind of like trapped by I need them as a resource in my life for these things, maybe we need to find more resources so that we're a little bit more free to decide how we want to interact with this dynamic rather than responding with, well, I need them to do this, so I can't really rock the boat here.
And I think, there's probably room for an episode on the side of, like we were saying earlier, the parent who has this experience with their child where there's all of a sudden these really firm boundaries. And then, like, what do I do? What do I do now that my child has put me in this estranged position and I don't really understand it. There might be people listening that need some support with that as well, right? Or even other relationships, in their lives where all of a sudden a wall has been put up. And I can imagine that that's got to be super jarring if we haven't had any conversations first about why.
And specifically any my brain wants to use the word safe conversations that aren't coming through protective moves, because I think that's what happens is we're so triggered. We're bringing up boundaries because we're trying to protect ourselves from being as triggered, but we lead with criticism and we lead with demand and we lead with contempt and things that are going to activate somebody else's nervous system even further. And it's really hard to get somebody to respond to us like a nurturing parent when we're coming at them in attack mode.
Okay, that's probably a good place for us to come up for air a bit in this conversation. And the hope is that you're able to just recognize that if you are having this experience with your parent or caregiver where I'm doing this healing and therapy, and then all of a sudden now I'm having this really intense reaction around them, and I can't unsee the things that I've been learning about in therapy, and it's really frustrating. Yep, that makes sense. We should expect that that is going to happen. It is part of the process of, not being able to unsee the water that you're swimming in. And there's a lot of things that we can do from here, right? The main piece that we hope you take away is that it's really important for us to practice individuation and gain some clarity as to why these dynamics exist. And there's probably a lot more questions that we can ask or put into our prompts in ChatGPT to start some conversations with our family and see what we can do to navigate this before we move so quickly to boundaries.
And speaking of questions, I just want to plug too, if you're listening and you have more specific questions about ways we could dive into this topic deeper, if you're like, okay, but how do you know if you're at the place to move into no contact? Or what about this specific way that triggers come up? That's where we would love for you to come to Relationship Academy and post those questions. We would love to have an idea of what you want to hear more about.
And lastly, our 10-day couples challenge is a great resource for you to be using in your relationships with your intimate partners. And you can find the link to that in our show notes. Thanks for listening.